shoes and out the door. 5, I'm alive. 6, 7, 8, feeling great.
Hello and welcome back to Beyond Your Wildest Genes podcast. My name is Dr. Noah DeCoyer and I am your co-host. Today our guest is Brad Kearns. Brad has worked closely with Mark Sisson since 2008 on the Primal Blueprint, the Primal Blueprint 90-Day Journal, the Primal Connection, and as co-author of Primal Endurance. Brad oversaw the development and release of the Primal Blueprint Expert Certification Program and was the coordinator of all 9 PrimalCon retreats, as well as the PrimalCon presenter of a running technique clinic and peak performance mindset lecture. Brad also co-created and presented the Primal Blueprint Transformation Seminar in over 20 cities across America. Brad also hosts the Primal Blueprint podcast, Primal Endurance podcast, and the Expert Certification webinars. Prior to joining the Primal team, Brad wrote 9 other books on health, fitness, and peak performance for McGraw-Hill and other publishers. Brad competed on the professional triathlon circuit for 9 years, where he won 31 events across the globe. Coached by Mark, Brad was a 2-time U.S. national champion, World Duathlon Series champion, and the number 3 ranked pro triathlete in the world in 1991. Brad is the founder and executive director of a nonprofit organization promoting cardiovascular fitness for kids in North California called Running School. Brad graduated cum laude from UC Santa Barbara in 1985, majoring in business, economics, and minoring in running injuries and serving. Whoa, that was a mouthful. How are you today, Brad? Hello, Brad. Great to hear you. So glad you're on. Let's get started right away and tell me about Primal Endurance.
Well, this is a book project that's been really special for Mark and I to engage in because we have such a long history in the endurance scene, having both been old-time competitive athletes, and Mark was my coach when I was racing on the professional circuit. We haven't been involved in many, many years because we've been promoting the Primal movement and actually, in a lot of cases, criticizing the endurance movement because the mainstream approach is so overly stressful and ill-advised, and people are enjoying these events. There's a boom being experienced in all the assorted endurance events like triathlon and marathon running and Spartan racing and all these new adventures. But generally speaking, the athlete out there is pursuing these goals in a manner that's increasing their stress level in their life and compromising their health. So what we wanted to do was blend the primal principles of honoring your genetic requirements for health and balancing stress and rest, and then taking these training principles that we've believed in and adhered to for so long and coached others to follow, generally a less stressful, less regimented approach than is commonly believed to be effective. So this book is hopefully setting up a new paradigm and revolutionizing the approach to endurance sports so that people can embrace a less stressful, more intuitive, more enjoyable, less time-consuming commitment to pursuing these goals.
So break down for us a few things that are wrong, quote-unquote wrong, the conventional approach to endurance training.
Oh, gee, I'm good at this because I get approached all the time by people, and they say, "Hey, Brad, can you help me train for this marathon? You have some advice?" And I'm like, "Yeah, my first advice is do a 13.1 instead of a 26.2." I mean, because we have these arbitrary goals that are set up by, in a lot of cases, it's marketing hype and tradition that doesn't have a lot of significance to our busy daily lives and the other time commitments and responsibilities we have. So, the marathon's 26 miles because of the Greek soldier Phidippides that ran that distance in the lore. But he collapsed and died when he finished his run. And the Ironman, the ultimate accomplishment in triathlon, is sort of 3 arbitrary distances that are extreme in length and not really suitable as a goal for anyone but a select few people that have all kinds of time and energy to train for an event that extreme. So, I feel like the world would be better off if marathon was 13 miles and Ironman was half the Ironman.
Right.
So that's my first starting point, is like, why don't you align the goals with your lifestyle and all the other considerations that'll make it facilitate a more balanced approach than this daunting task that's kind of over your head, and you feel intimidated and anxious about it. And so therefore you push yourself too hard with too much time spent working out and not enough time spent resting because you're insecure about your chances of completing such a crazy challenge.
Now, I'm historically a runner as well, and I've run the marathons and the half marathons and some early Spartan races. And when I was, and even in high school, when I was going through all these 5Ks and 10Ks, every night before a race, there was this gigantic pasta dinner, right? Because we were told that we had to refuel or fuel eating loads of pasta, loads of bread. I know there's a different way, and I know there's a better way. How can we transition from being a carb-dependent athlete or runner to a fat-burning beast where we're using ketones as energy as opposed to glucose?
Well, that's a great question. It seems to be the operative question, and in many ways, the most important element of transitioning from the overly stressful mainstream approach that's characterized by carbohydrate dependency. So what happens is if you're locked into this chronic pattern, we call it chronic cardio or chronic exercise pattern, you're training a little bit too hard, a little bit too high of a heart rate, doing it too frequently with insufficient rest in between. So you're locked in a chronic pattern and you're depleting yourself over and over on a regular basis. You're doing these depleting workouts that are fatiguing, exhausting, and leave you hungry for carbohydrates because that's the fuel that you burned up when you were working out. When you're working out at an elevated heart rate, a heart rate that's too high to be properly aerobic, you're burning a greater percentage of glucose and a less percentage of fat. So you're in this carbohydrate dependency pattern where you actually do need to pound the pasta and the bread and the designer beverages and bars and gels and things like that just to sustain this ill-advised training pattern in the first place. So to transition to a healthier approach where you can actually perform better, drop that excess body fat that's being stuck on your body because you're in this carbohydrate dependency approach, and every time you consume a high carbohydrate meal, you shut off burning the stored body fat, and you're dependent on the next ingestion of calories when your blood sugar drops from the insulin response to the meal. I hope I'm not talking too fast. I'm assuming that your listeners have a basic knowledge of the primal paleo message and the rationale for eating, for ditching, processed carbs that are the centerpiece of our diet. So then we have this training component also where you have to slow the heck down with your workouts and have a more balanced workout regimen that does not set you up into carbohydrate dependency pattern. And by that, the first thing you do is reduce your pace down into the aerobic range where you're burning mostly fat and you're not tapping into those glycogen stores to sustain a pace that's too fast for day-to-day training for endurance goals.
And to achieve this and beyond just running in a certain zone, what do we have to eat to get us away from being carb dependent to becoming used to and our body used to burning more fat?
So the first step is to, back off on the crazy workouts, because no matter what any podcast guest says, if you're coming home from the gym and you're craving sugar and the Primal guys recommend that you shouldn't consume processed carbohydrate, it's not going to happen too well for you. You're going to honor your appetite and your cravings.
Right.
So when you regulate your exercise to be less stressful at a lower heart rate, we can talk about the specifics shortly, then you'll start to get home, finish these workouts, and feel refreshed and energized as you should, rather than slightly fuzzy in the head and fatigued and depleted. So when you have the training patterns organized, then you can go into this transitional period in your diet, and we call it the 21-day transformation, where you make a concerted effort to ditch grains and sugars. It's a short period of time at first where you really have to use some discipline because it's so radically different, perhaps so radically different from your lifelong eating patterns where, you want to cut out all sweetened beverages, and so you're cutting out the breads and rice and pastas, and instead of suffering and being in this starvation pattern, which most people have experienced on diets, and they realize how ineffective it is. Instead, you nourish yourself with whatever high nutrient value, Primal approved foods that you wish. So this is high fat and low carb is, generally speaking, what it looks like to go Primal. So instead of cereal and toast and juice in the morning, you can have a nice, delicious omelet with vegetables and cheese and meat inside and avocado and salsa, and enjoy these rich, nutritious, satisfying meals where there's absolutely no suffering, struggling, or deprivation involved in your transition to going Primal.
Right. So to say it very simply, it's a two-pronged approach where you're changing the way you train, and then after you change the way you train, you're changing the way you eat.
It's really it could be considered a one-pronged approach, because most people, just transition the diet starting today, and you'll make progress toward becoming Primal adapted, or fat adapted, we call it, where you're actually good at burning stored body fat. You're not addicted to these regular meal patterns because your blood sugar is fluctuating constantly throughout the day, and you're going to get moody and cranky if you miss a single meal. Those are the kind of things that anyone is capable of quickly transitioning out of when they cut sugars and grains out and start eating more high nutritious, wholesome, Primal approved foods like meat, fish, fowl, eggs, vegetables, fruits, nuts, and seeds. So the training question is particular only to people who are locked in these ill-advised training patterns and sabotaging their potential success with dietary modification because they have too high of a demand for carbs thanks to their overly stressful workouts.
Right, right. Now, where does strength training and sprinting fit into this model for the endurance athlete?
Right. So if you get into this book, you'll see that we go in stages from talking about the initial perspective is to just reduce that stress level and that chronic nature of your workouts, slow down your pace, understand what it means to build an aerobic base at comfortable heart rates where you're getting stronger and stronger by going slow and comfortable rather than challenging your body with stressful workouts. But then there comes a time where you have this nice aerobic base built, you have some fat adaptation going on, so the diet's working well too, and to experience your potential, even in an extreme endurance event, you can benefit from doing brief, high-intensity strength training sessions for your muscles, and then sprinting for your particular sport, ideally, weight-bearing like running sprints. But these are, you must consider these the icing on the cake, especially for an endurance athlete with endurance goals. These have they're a very, very small time commitment and really minimal in importance in comparison to building that strong, successful aerobic base. So I think there's another kind of fad going on right now that I observe in the endurance community, and that is this notion that you can hack or shortcut the process of getting fit by favoring high-intensity workouts instead of the, quote, junk mileage or whatever people call it when you're putting a lot of time and hours in at a slower pace. And both of these notions are oversimplified and misunderstood. So it's not about just doing a bunch of mileage at a slow pace. That's what we did 40 years ago at the start of the endurance movement and the boom of the running. And everyone thought it was just about accumulating more and more mileage. And then now in recent years, you have a lot of these fads going on where they'll take an endurance athlete and have them jump up and down on boxes and run sprints, and then they go home and they expect to be ready to run a marathon. It's a sensible marrying of the two types of training: the comfortably paced aerobic workouts, and then some brief high-intensity strength and sprint workouts. And the reason those have any role whatsoever is because it's difficult to put yourself under tremendous challenging load that you find, let's say at mile 20 of the marathon proceeding to mile 26. I mean, you're going to get a training effect from making that last 6 miles. You're pushing your body to the very edge and challenging your musculature and your the breakdown of your supporting muscles. But that's not going to happen every day in training. It's not going to happen hardly ever. But if you go into a gym and obviously working up to it, whatever your competency is, but if you can put yourself under load with weight-bearing squats, that's going to have a phenomenal effect on your ability to sustain your pace and especially your technique as you fatigue during your long-distance aerobic workouts.
Makes perfect sense to me. What is the target heart range for that regular running workout that we're talking about?
Yeah, a very important question, because when people say, "Oh, I'm just taking it easy. I'm doing an easy workout today. I'm honoring the great principles of training, not to push yourself too hard." And what they do is they go out there and they train at a heart rate that's too elevated. So the secret to properly building an aerobic base and aerobic training in general is to stay at or below what's called your maximum aerobic heart rate. Not your maximum heart rate, but your maximum aerobic heart rate is defined as the point where maximum aerobic benefits occur with a minimal amount of anaerobic stimulation. So it's a very, very easy and comfortable heart rate where you're conversational, you can carry on a conversation and not get out of breath. One thing I mentioned in the book is you can actually breathe through your nose and get enough oxygen because you're going at such a comfortable pace. But those subjective efforts are much less effective than actually getting a heart rate monitor and using Dr. Phil Maffetone's formula for defining your maximum aerobic heart rate as 180 minus your age. So in my case, I'm 50 years old, and I would be using a maximum aerobic heart rate of 130 beats per minute. And anyone who does this calculation in their head and then puts on a heart rate monitor and heads out there for a workout, most people will probably be absolutely shocked at how slow you have to go to maintain aerobic heart rates. And in the book, we have stories about Mark Allen and Mike Pigg, probably the two greatest triathletes of all time, and how when they started adopting Dr. Maffetone's training methods, they were embarrassed. They were running, 8-minute miles at their aerobic limit because they were so poorly aerobically trained and had such high performance on anaerobic efforts, that they're doing in the races, but they needed to go back and get stronger and build that base to enjoy a greater potential, just like anyone else. So it's tough, man. I mean, this is the hardest thing for the listeners to say, okay, I'm going to do it. It makes sense. I'm going to make a commitment to build my aerobic system and reduce the stress on my body of endurance training. And here's my heart watch. And here I am sitting out on for a jog, and you hit 130 and it starts beeping, and you're like, oh my goodness. So, it might be a jog walk at first, even for a quite fit person who can run a marathon at a respectable, 3.5 hours or 4 hours, or a 3-hour marathoner might be absolutely surprised at how slow they have to go to truly develop their aerobic system without that interference from anaerobic stimulation.
All right, so let's use me as an example, and let's just say I'm the traditional, I run 30 to 40 miles a week, pay no attention to my heart rate, breathing through my mouth, eat a lot of carbs, I eat some protein, and I approach you and I say, Brad, I want to change. I read the book. I need a little bit of help. I want to get further down this primal approach. What are the first few things that I need to do?
Well, first, let's recognize what this hypothetical, I hope it's not you, but.
No, it's not.
What this hypothetical person is doing is they're fine-tuning, to give a car analogy, which all good speakers on endurance do. They're fine-tuning a small engine. So you're putting in that 30, 40 miles a week. You're refeeding with your carbs. You're not very good at burning fat because you're on that carb pattern. You're putting in a fair amount of work, so you're way fitter than your next door neighbor. But because the pace is slightly too difficult and slightly too stressful every time, you're having difficulty recovering properly from these workouts. And when it's time to push yourself to a maximum effort, like actually jumping into a 10K race and racing, you're going to be mediocre in comparison to your potential, and probably mediocre in comparison to the top runners out there in your area. So it involves backing up and taking a big picture approach about what you want to do with your endurance goals. And if you really want to get faster and understand what it feels like to be kind of an elite type of athlete for whatever your parameters and restrictions are, you can get so much more out of your body when you have the patience to slow down and build your mitochondrial engine and your fat-burning enzymes and get really, really good at burning fat at a slower pace. So then the magical thing that happens is your heart rate is set at 180 minus your age. Okay, it's going to change 1 beat every year if you're using the calculations, but the heart rate doesn't change. But what changes is how fast you can go at that comfortable aerobic heart rate, because over time you get better and better and better and more efficient at burning fat. And what that's doing is expanding your top end potential when it is time to run fast. But if you can only hold 12-minute miles at your aerobic maximum heart rate right now, your performance is going to be severely limited when you're talking about your potential on a marathon or a triathlon or a 10K. So if you can get that 12-minute mile down to 11 and a half after a month of careful training, or 11 or 10:30 or 9:45 someday, you've just made a massive improvement that hasn't required a lot of high stress, challenging, injury risk, immune system risk workouts like speed workouts running around the track. This is what you're doing, is you're taking the time to build a large, beautiful, high-functioning, clean-burning aerobic engine. So in the book we call it a Tesla engine, because it burns clean on solar instead of a smoke belching tiny little piece of junk car that you keep filling with more gas and pushing the gas pedal down to the floor and getting the most out of an inefficient engine.
So it's much more of a process, like health is, than an event. This is something that takes time, concerted effort. You need the heart rate monitor. It takes effort.
It takes some discipline, because basically the profile of the endurance athlete, highly motivated, goal-oriented, driven, focused, linear thinking, just like they made it through law school or they climbed up the corporate ladder with this linear approach. And here you have to have a more dynamic, intuitive, and fluctuating approach. And basically, for a good one-liner, if you're taking notes out there at home, or pull over your car now and take notes here, I want to remind you that you should take only what your body gives you each day and nothing more. So if you're tired, dragging, your motivation is flagging, that's not a good day to go push yourself and do a workout for the sake of adhering to some predetermined schedule. It's a good day to rest, take it easy, pay attention to those subjective signs. Andrew McNaughton, former all-time top professional triathlete on the circuit in the 80s and early 90s, he's in there talking about how he learned after many, many years and decades at the top of the sport and coaching athletes, including some of the top athletes in the world, he realized that checking in and sensing his moods was the best way to dictate his training schedule, which is it's a phenomenal comment for the average person to listen to and say, what the heck is this guy talking about? And this is, one of the most knowledgeable coaches and athletes in the sport, who realizes that just the mood of the day is the operating factor that's way more important than even the technology, like the heart rate and the heart rate variability and the tracking and all that. So that's a profound concept to ponder if you're home locked into this regimented approach and thinking that's going to work.
It seems like having a heart monitor is pretty important. I know that you running at a conversational pace is a good way to start. Is there a heart rate monitor that you recommend?
Oh, well, lots of people make quality heart rate monitors these days. Polar has been the leading brand. They were kind of the first people to bring the wireless heart rate monitor to the masses, and I've used those with great success. But the point is, because it's so difficult to discipline yourself to stay at that aerobic heart rate, it's kind of frustrating and all that. You really, really need to use that thing every single day. And you don't, I'm not going to accept a quip from an experienced athlete like, oh, I can feel my heart rate. I'm really good about that, because it's really difficult to lock into that perceived exertion and dial it back even more than, what seems like an easy workout. So that's a real eye opener for people. But the good news, the bad news is, hey man, you got to slow down, you got to chill out, you got to start walking up the hills and all that. But the good news is you'll progress really quickly with your aerobic function, and so you will start to notice your pace improving after just a few weeks of dedication to this type of training. And how do you do that? You perform what's called a MAF test, a maximum aerobic function test, and that is simply going to the same venue every time. So let's say you go to a running track, if you're a runner, and you run 8 laps around the track while trying to maintain a heart rate as close to 130 beats a minute as possible. That's my example. Or however old you are. If you're 40, it's 180 minus your age is 140. So you get onto that track and you escalate your pace right up to 140, and you try to peg it there. It's going to go 142, 139, 141, whatever. But you complete this test at your aerobic heart rate and then time yourself. So your first time out, like I said, hey, if you're running 12-minute miles, that's 8 laps is 2 miles, that's 24 minutes, and you're going to try to beat that 24-minute time the next time you step on the track.
Makes perfect sense. I'm really getting a clear picture. Even for me, like I said, I'm a runner for my whole life, that how important a heart rate monitor is. It's really, really becoming clear. Now let's have fun with this next question, Brad. You mentioned you're 50. I know you're an incredible athlete. You're a championship speed golfer. Earlier last year, you cleared 5.3 in a high jump. You did a 400 meters in 59 seconds, which blows my mind. Are you just a freak of nature, or what's going on with you?
Hey, thanks for noticing. Gee whiz. It's I feel like it's important to maintain that competitive passion throughout life. And I had a nice run in the endurance world. I was a professional for 9 years, from ages 20 to 30. But by the time I was 30, because we didn't know as much as we know now, my overly stressful approach kind of left me, with nothing left in the tank. So I had to move on from my endurance goals and then kind of recalibrate my my direction to try to preserve my health and delay the aging process, rather than, for the time that I was a pro, my goal was to go faster and faster over the race course. And when you're competing at a high level and that dedicated, and the margin of error and the margin of victory is so narrow, it's really not good for your health to be a professional endurance athlete. It's just, you're always on that edge, that very edge of breakdown and burnout, because you have to be. Otherwise, some other guy is going to be training a little harder than you and going a little faster. So, at the time when I was immersed in the athletic career, I considered myself a pretty healthy guy, but it was a complete ruse. There was nothing healthy about training to that extreme, eating that much food, traveling on jet airplanes all over the globe to compete. And it was really a very stressful period of my life. Even though I enjoyed it, I'm saying stressful because the constant physical stress and, the mental and emotional stress of being a competitor and, lining up on the starting line in order to pay your mortgage and your grocery bill, that was a pretty high intensity situation. So, then I became a father. I was committed to coaching youth sports, and all these other goals appeared in my life. And the main one actually was to dominate the kids I coached for as long as possible. So that was really a driving force when my son got into second, third grade and started doing organized sports. And I coached soccer and track and basketball. And, I stayed with these guys, and I was the MVP up until they got to be about 8th grade. And then all of a sudden, 9th grade, 10th grade, they were so much better than me that I wasn't even invited to play in the pickup games. So I went from MVP to guy in the stands clapping. But, during that time, I sincerely did want to be a participatory coach and parent. And so I wanted to be, conditioned enough and fit enough to jump onto a basketball court and play in a pickup game or play in the adult leagues for many years, and coach and be able to be an extra guy in the scrimmage against some all-star eighth graders. And it was a high bar to aspire to for a 40-year-old guy or 45-year-old guy. And there's always something out there compelling me to try to get better at. But now, since I'm not I'm not a professional athlete, I'm just a goofing off guy trying to get some hits on YouTube. These goals are designed to support my health and support my goal of delaying the aging process, rather than come at win at all cost commitment where I'm sacrificing my health in a small way for the goal. And I mention this because my concern is that there's a lot of casual, amateur, everyday people that are parents and workers and have all these other things going on in their life, and they love their triathlon training, and they think that it's contributing to a balanced lifestyle. It's an outlet for other forms of stress. But if their approach is too stressful, it is going to accelerate the aging process. It's going to elevate disease risk factors, including cardiac disease risk factors. And you can go on TED Talks and search for Dr. James O'Keefe TED Talk. He gives a talk called Run for Your Life, but not too fast and at a slow pace. And he talks about how anything over just a very baseline cardiovascular exercise commitment, he says a couple hours a week, and there's a lot of research from other countries and other doctors confirming this, that if you go anything beyond a couple hours a week of very slow jogging, you are not getting any additional health benefit. And in fact, when you get up to the hypothetical 30, 40 mile a week guy or the person training for a marathon or all that, you are very likely to be compromising your health and putting your heart under excessive stress to the extent that you are elevating your heart disease risk factors for being an endurance athlete. And that's kind of a sobering thing to reflect upon. I have numerous peers that I raced with on the professional triathlon circuit that have come up with bad heart function in their later years because, well, I mean, you could speculate that it's because of the extreme load that they put on their hearts for so many years when they were training at the highest level. So, I want nothing to do with anything that's going to accelerate the aging process or compromise my general state of health or my ability to enjoy life in general.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more, because that was my next question. We've talked a lot about the benefits of the primal endurance, and you mentioned sacrificing your health. Are these chronic endurance athletes really risking their health? You mentioned the cardiovascular disease. What risk factors are we talking about? What ill health are we talking about?
Well, as Dr. O'Keefe's presentation says very clearly, you are incurring moderate, tiny scarring and inflammation of the heart every time you do, let's say, a strenuous endurance workout. Under normal circumstances, just like any other muscle, your heart can recover from a traumatic event, and in a couple days, the inflammation will be down and everything will be fine. But if you over and over again, year after year after year, race bicycles in the amateur racing category, and you're sprinting and doing these crazy workouts and climbing up hills and competing in the events on the weekend, you're putting your heart under an excessive load to the extent that it will cause scarring and calcification of the arteries and all the same risk factors that you hear about from sedentary folks that don't exercise and eat crappy food and smoke and have all these other things coming in. So the endurance athlete overstressing the heart muscle in particular, but also overstressing the endocrine system, the immune system. There's a lot of occasions of serious athletes reporting poor health. There was a kind of an expose in Outside Magazine on the ultra runners that crashed and burned at an alarming rate. And, it's really disturbing where the article lists, several of the leading ultra runners on the planet in the past decade coming into the sport, arriving on the scene, performing extraordinary achievements of winning 100-mile races and 100K races against the top competition, and then falling off the face of the earth 2 years later and experiencing extreme burnout. I think that the article is called Running on Empty in Outside Magazine, but there's numerous similar themed articles and studies popping up where we're noticing that you can get into this high stress mode. You can ask your adrenal glands and all the stress components in your body to rise to the occasion. And anybody can relate to this, even outside of athletics. If you're, working those 70-hour weeks at the law firm trying to make partner, and you grind for 8 years straight, or you do any other high stress career, like you're a roadie for Pearl Jam and you're partying all night and setting up lights all day in the next city, and then getting on the bus and going again. There's a lot of ways that we put ourselves under extreme stress, and we survive. A medical school student going into residency and working those crazy hours, and your body rises to the occasion, but there is an extremely high risk of burnout in the aftermath of these imbalanced approaches to athletics or career or whatever you're doing that's not sensible and healthy.
I agree. Now, the Primal Endurance book is obviously a great place to start, but tell us a little bit how the Primal Blueprint Expert certification would help and would be really interesting for some people to look into.
So we created this program a couple of years ago. It actually took about 3 years to develop, and the desire here was to have an educational program for people that wanted to take their primal knowledge to the highest level. And that includes people that are coaches, professionals like yourself, that work with clients and interact with others where they have a chance to motivate and inspire people to change their life and want to become expert knowledge on all aspects of primal living, all the dietary aspects, the health and disease risk factors that we talked about just now, the exercise components, the training methods, and the philosophies that are detailed in Primal Endurance. So we have this wonderful online home study self-paced course where everything is digital. You enroll in the course and you log into the portal, and you have all the resources, all the books and audiobooks and things that we published. But the centerpiece of the course is the reading material and the examination process, where you have to take an exam after 13 modules and show your competency on the various topics that are exactly aligned with the content in the Primal Blueprint 21-day Total Body Transformation book. So it's the 8 key concepts and the 5 action items. And once you get through all that and you graduate, you get the distinction on our website and a nice package of goodies to celebrate your achievement. But it's hard work. Like you mentioned offline, you're putting in a lot of hours, and you can consider it like an upper division college course in the health sciences that's specifically devoted to the Primal Blueprint and Primal Living and evolutionary health principles. So it's the leading offering of its kind in this very popular primal paleo scene. So those are people who are interested in, investing in themselves and bettering their education. This is a really fun course, and we're happy that it's been so well received. We got a lot of students out there going for it and graduating and spreading the word.
I absolutely loved it. It was challenging. It has helped me in my personal life and my professional life, and I recommend it frequently to whoever is looking for a course of this nature, for sure.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Noah. And the readers, the talk we've had about endurance stuff. If you're an endurance athlete, even a casual person who just has a commitment to cardio, you're not saying you're a big competitor trying to go race around the world like I mentioned, but anyone who's pursuing endurance goals of any level will benefit greatly from this primal endurance approach, because there's unique considerations when you're an endurance athlete that you got to preserve your health. And it's just to be frank right now, it's not happening. I'm not very impressed with the conventional approach. I see people that are tired, broken down. They still have that passion to do it, and they're enjoying themselves. But there will be a massive rate of attrition if it continues like this, because you cannot sustain high-stress lifestyle patterns for too long, even if you enjoy that so-called stress that you're doing, the weekend long runs or the bike rides or whatever. But it's having a detrimental effect on your body because the approach is wrong, and you're in carbohydrate dependency instead of fat adaptation and so forth.
I couldn't agree more. Brad, thank you so much for your time, your effort, your hard work. Any final words for us?
Check out the Primal Endurance podcast if you want to hear weekly shows, the Primal Blueprint podcast, and you can get Primal Endurance on Amazon.com or wherever you like to shop for books. And it was a pleasure to talk about it. And we're open and available, so send an email to info@primalblueprintpublishing.com. And if it's a question, we'll discuss it on our podcast, or you need some personal guidance after reading the book. We want people to change their lives, and we want to give them all the tools and techniques they can. So we'll do anything we can to help you out there as a listener if you're expressing interest and ready to receive some new information that's going to challenge your conventional beliefs. So that's my ending statement. Good luck out there.
Great, and thanks, Brad. My name is Dr. Noah DeCoyer, your co-host, and you are listening to the Beyond Your Wildest Genes podcast. If you'd like what you've heard today, please share this with your friends and family and encourage them to subscribe on iTunes. You can sign up for our incredible weekly email at www.centerforepigeneticexpression.com, and please let me encourage you to check out our first project at www.painreliefproject.com. Thank you, and as my oldest son Hayden says, be awesome and never unawesome.